The first thing you would have seen was blood. Thick, dark, alive, crawling slowly across the cracked pavement of the alley like it was trying to escape the body it came from. The siren flashes didn't belong here, not in this dead corner, not where the city forgot people still breathed. But the red and blue glare spilled over the asphalt like a heartbeat that wasn't mine. I remember looking down at it and not moving for a moment, like my own body didn't understand yet whether I was the witness or the casualty. Someone behind me was gasping through broken breath, wet, shallow, terrified, and for a split second I didn't know if it was me. My hands were shaking, slick with someone else's blood, but I didn't wipe them off, because wiping it off would make it real. The air smelled like metal and burned plastic, like the world had been scraped raw an inch at a time. I could feel the blast from moments ago still vibrating through my bones, like the ground itself hadn't settled after screaming. I didn't know if the person bleeding on the asphalt was about to die, but I knew that if they did, it would be because I didn't move fast enough. And that was the moment I understood. I wasn't just inside the danger. I was the hinge it would swing on. There was a shape lying ahead of me in the half-shadow, not fully lit by the siren glow, not fully swallowed by the dark. Like the night wasn't sure if it wanted to claim the body or return it. My ears were ringing hard enough that every sound came from underwater. And yet I could still hear the gun hammer resetting behind me. Someone was shouting, but their voice was distant, like a radio signal cutting through static from another universe. I didn't turn. If I turned, I would have to face their eyes, and I wasn't ready to show them mine yet. Shame, nausea, adrenaline, it all lived under my skin like electricity with no exit wound. I felt small, and broken, and cornered, and for a second I let myself believe it, because believing it made me invisible. If I looked weak, harmless, disoriented, the people behind the trigger wouldn't flinch when I breathed. People never guard themselves from something they already think they've beaten. That's why I didn't speak. That's why I let my shoulders tremble. That's why I didn't look back. The alley felt like a throat tightening around me, squeezing every direction into a funnel of inevitability. Someone kicked debris near the brick wall, glass chattered across the pavement, and I could tell by the angle of the sound that one of them moved closer, closing the space, tightening the kill box. The air changed. You can always feel it when a weapon is pointed at you with intent, not fear. Fear trembles. Intent breathes slow. They weren't scared of me. They were preparing to erase me. And still, I didn't turn. Because prey turns. Hunters wait. Something warm rolled past my shoe. A drip. A smear. A reminder that someone's timeline was collapsing behind me one heartbeat at a time. And that was when the thought formed, not loud, but surgical. Clean as a blade sliding between ribs. If I don't act now, someone dies who didn't choose this. I didn't know if the person on the ground was a stranger or a bystander or a shield or bait. But I knew what they'd become if I hesitated. A body. I swallowed slowly, tasted blood that wasn't mine, and finally lifted my head. I still didn't turn around, because they didn't deserve my fear. They deserved the debt, and they were about to learn who owed who. I am the one telling you this. The alley smelled like smoke and cheap beer, and the siren light cut through the dark in bands that made everything look like a wound. Blood pooled near my boot, and the sight of it did not make me flinch. They approached in groups, confident and loud, wearing the face of a community that wanted problems fixed quietly. They were not volunteers. They were paid, armed, and practiced at making people disappear with a show so small no one would notice. I had found the evidence of their payments, shell companies, false invoices, night transfers hidden inside maintenance budgets. When you follow a money trail, you follow people who never planned for being exposed. That was the mistake they made. They never planned on being seen. Footsteps closed. Voices barked orders as if the alley had become a courtroom and they were the judges. I kept my hands where they could see them. I looked small on purpose. If they thought they could break me, They would move reckless and loud, exactly the kind of men who make tactical mistakes. One of them stepped with a limp. Another kept shifting his weight to his right shoulder. Small things. Tells. I counted them because counting keeps your head when panic wants to take it. They spoke about authority and property like mantras, but their words were thin and brittle. Authority without law is just a mask for violence. I let them believe the story they needed to believe, that I was a problem that could be shoved aside. I let their arrogance grow. It was currency I intended to spend. They circled like dogs that have learned to bark louder than bite. Then a hand brushed metal at a hip in a motion that was more ritual than need. That movement told me everything I needed to know. This was not a random intimidation. This was a planned removal. People who plan removals lead patterns. I had read those patterns before. I had watched what men like these do when they think no one will hold them to account. I had options then, each brutal in its own way. I could burn the ledger and disappear, let them keep the structure, but remove the witness. That would save me, but it would not stop them from doing it again. I could call it in, bring the badge wearers by the book, and hope the real system would act fast enough. That might end it. But evidence gets lost, and men like these have friends who move with quieter hands. Or I could fight in a way that broke the machine, not just one of its cogs. I chose the last one because the ledger mattered more than my fear. Choosing it meant more pain. Choosing it meant exposure. Choosing it meant war. I moved when one of them lunged to make a spectacle. He wanted a confession, a physical proof to pass around later. A story that kept his name clean at meetings. He reached with anger, not with technique. He overcommitted. That gave me the window I needed. I used his momentum against him. He went down hard and fast. The sound of his body hitting concrete was flat and final. The rest hesitated. Arrogance turned into calculation in a heartbeat. They were good at scaring neighbors, not at hand-to-hand where consequences are immediate and ugly. They scrambled for weapons and for orders. I remember thinking how thin their courage looked when the ground ate their swagger. 2 of them rushed me at once, and I did not fight like a girl in a movie. I fought like someone who had rehearsed every movement until it stopped feeling like a choice. I disarmed one with a small, savage motion and used his weight to throw him into the other. They collapsed in a pile, surprised, humiliated, vulnerable. They had trained to terrify, not to be terrified. That reversal is the swiftest lesson. I am the one telling you this. Remember that. Their radios chirped and their leader barked that they should retreat to the van, to the plan. But plans fall apart when people die on the pavement and witnesses react. They were thinking about damage control, not justice. I knew they would try to frame what happened here as a street fight, as a liability on both sides. I also knew their files. What they feared more than exposure was the ledger, the chain of payments. Break the chain, and the machine starves. They backed off then, regrouping near the mouth of the alley, shouting orders through clenched teeth. A van idled on the main road like a shark waiting to take whatever could be caught. The leader said something into his sleeve that made the others flinch. I could hear the tape of it in my head. Threats, numbers, the names of people they thought disposable. I needed to stay alive, not for pride, but for the ledger, for the proof that would end the whole thing. If I died here, the money would keep moving and the men with guns would keep getting paid. So I did not run. I did not plead. I stayed, and I forced them into a mistake they could not afford. I baited them with my weakness, and when they committed, I took the window. It was ugly. It was precise. It left them on asphalt, cursing the moment they underestimated one small, damaged person who would not be erased. When the leader finally stepped forward, his face split with the kind of anger that knows it will have to answer later. He ordered them to finish it. They hesitated. That hesitation multiplied into other mistakes they would later try to hide. Documents get lost, but men keep telling stories. In those stories, tonight looked worse than they wanted. More to come. I am the one telling you this. The next part is where things stop being about the alley and start being about who pays. when a corrupt network is threatened. And you will see how far they go to silence those who open the books. I am the one telling you this, and when you hear my voice now, remember that every bruise and every number I mention is something I carried long. Before I ever learned the words case or evidence, the alley smelled like diesel, piss, and burned rubber. And I wrote those smells into memory the way other people write names into a notebook. Because smells, like names, tell you who has been where. They moved in predictable groups, men used to winning small wars in boardrooms and back halls. And they were the face of a community that needed someone to blame. So they would not be blamed themselves. I let them see a trembling shoulder and a wet cheek. Because a broken portrait invites arrogance, and arrogance is the fastest way to make a man move badly. I am the one telling you this. Letting them think I was fragile was a decision that kept me alive long enough to choose the kind of violence that ends systems, not just nights. I watched boots and not faces. Because faces lie and boots tell you how a person plans to use their weight. And a good reader of movement can tell the difference between a bluff and a commitment a heartbeat ahead of time. One of them favored his left side when he walked. A small limp that came from a bone that never healed right. That tiny flaw told me his center of gravity and how far he would overextend when he lunged. I kept breathing slow and even, counted the spaces between their steps like breaths, and used that rhythm to plan where to place my feet, so their momentum would carry them into the answer I wanted. I found a receipt in my pocket and held it against my palm like a promise. It was no longer just a scrap of paper, but the first thread in a rope I meant to throw around the neck of the whole operation. I am the one telling you this. That receipt would become a needle that unpicked an entire sweater of lies if I lived to take it to someone who could read numbers for motives. They talked loud so they sounded like authority. But loud is a mask for thinness, and I watched the leader's voice break on syllables when he thought no one would notice. And the break is always an entrance for someone who knows how to step through it. I let the leader raise his chest and throw threats, because threatening requires a pattern. And once a pattern begins, it is easier to predict the next move than to be surprised by it. A trash lid clanged near my foot and I flinched on purpose. He moved to show off in front of the others, and in that flourish he lost the tripod of his balance and gave me a moment that I kept in my teeth like a coin. When he lunged with show and heat instead of angle and torque. He wanted a story and not a lesson. So his body committed to a single line, and I used that line to fold him onto concrete. With the economy of someone who has practiced saving lives by breaking bodies, they scrambled for weapons then. Because when men think they are losing face, they reach for the things that make noise and look important, and noise rarely solves precision problems. I am the one telling you this. Watching them scramble was like watching a poorly rehearsed play, where the props suddenly fall and actors expose themselves as fake. 2 of them came at once, and their coordination was clumsy, trained for intimidation. Not for the moment when intimidation meets resistance that moves with purpose. I turned them into a heap that cursed and breathed unevenly. The leader barked orders, and his voice tried to stitch control back together. But their plan is paper, and paper burns when the wind of truth hits it. And I was the gust that ripped the edges. I moved through the group like a slow blade, taking away weapons with small, ugly motions that left them stunned more than bloody. Because stunned men tell better stories than dead ones do when it comes time to convince the public. I am the one telling you this. Remember that my goal was never to make the alley pretty. It was to make sure there were witnesses to arrogance and receipts. That made arrogance look like a funded conspiracy. A phone buzzed and a hand shot to silence it. That small motion gave me a name and a voice and a timestamp. Because men who belong to networks never switch off the things that connect them. And those connections are proof. They backed up toward the mouth of the alley and tried to form a perimeter. A body of men pretending they were stability. But a fake perimeter only works when people believe fear without looking. And I was the person who would force them to look. I watched a van idling at the curb and a hand pass a hard drive into a coat The drive was not hidden well, and their nervous hands made the exchange clumsy and obvious, and therefore retrievable if you know where to search. I am the one telling you this. I could have gone for the drive that second with a thief's move, and a smoke and vanished, but the ledger meant more than a single memory. The ledger could topple them, and toppling is what I was there to do. So I let them think they could retreat. And I followed not close enough to be targeted, but close enough that every backward step they took was a confession in my ledger of sight, step, and breath. Their leader whispered into a sleeve, and numbers slipped into the air like a poison that only those used to reading poisons could name. And those numbers were how they paid off silence and secured violence. Two men tried to circle behind me to make sure I could not leave. They found that force applied at wrong angles bruises the ego faster than it defeats the body, and they collapsed into each other with the sound of plans breaking. I am the one telling you this. When plans break, what remains is the truth of who stood where and who let what happen. And I keep track of those small truths like a ledger keeper keeps coins. They retreated into the street with the van, angry and rattled and muttering about losing face. And I let them go because a hunted animal that runs will show you everything about where it sleeps and who feeds it. More to come. I am the one telling you this. And the next part is where names become evidence and the alley stops being a location and becomes a map to the whole rotten heart of what they called security. I am the one telling you this. And now you need to understand that nothing you saw in the alley so far was random. Every move, every step, every glance was measured. They thought they cornered a girl, trembling and scared. They were wrong. My breath is even now calm, a metronome. They do not know it yet, but I see everything. I see the angles, the exits, the weak points in their formation. One man's shoulder is too tense. Another's wrist twitches near a holster. That is all it takes to control a fight before it begins. I crouch slightly behind a dumpster, my fingers brushing the concrete. I sense the vibrations of their boots, the slight shifts in their weight. I could strike any one of them and the others would not know what hit them. I let them approach, thinking I am small, weak, powerless. That is my advantage. I am the one telling you this. Their arrogance is loud, clumsy, predictable. I hear the leader curse under his breath. He tries to coordinate his people, but panic breaks patterns faster than bullets. One of them steps on a wet patch, slips, and for a heartbeat, the whole group is destabilized. I do not act yet. I wait. Observation is the deadliest weapon. The first man lunges with a clumsy swing, predictable, slappy. I step aside, using his momentum to push him into another. The sound of bodies colliding against asphalt echoes like a drum signaling a storm. I am the one telling you this. This is the moment they start to realize the miscalculation. They did not prepare for this. They do not know who I am. They do not know that I have trained to read micro movements, to anticipate reactions, to turn overconfidence into failure. Their formation collapses further as two more move hastily, and I redirect them against each other. Small, controlled, precise. Pain, but no death yet. They are learning fast that I am not ordinary. I glance back at the alley entrance, the van waiting, the street lights cutting lines across wet asphalt. Every exit they think they have is already a trap. They try to regroup, but fear slows decisions. I am calm. I am the storm inside this narrow corridor. I am the one telling you this. I watch every twitch, every glance, every hesitant breath. A man shouts at another. Orders. Threats. The sound is useless. They are scrambling, out of rhythm. I exploit it, making calculated advances, small strikes, nothing fatal yet. I want them to feel that helpless confusion before the consequences become real. They are prey, thinking they are hunters. They are arrogant, predictable, perfect. I step forward, closer now, letting them think I have made a mistake. My voice is soft but clear. Stop. Step back. They flinch. I am the one telling you this. No one had ever heard me speak until now. That's my first reveal. They hear a voice, confident and unshakable, and the world shifts an inch under their feet. They glance around, unsure who I am. That hesitation is a weapon. I am not who they expected. I take a few more controlled steps, each movement deliberate. The leader tries to restore order. He gestures, shouts, points. I read the microsignals. His confidence is cracking. One small slip in judgment is all it takes. I wait for it. More to come. Another man reaches for a weapon. Predictable. I disarm him in one clean, brutal motion, letting the others see the failure in real time. Their panic multiplies. They try to retreat, but every exit has already been accounted for. Their perimeter is meaningless now. They realize, too late, that control has shifted. I am the one telling you this, remember. Every breath, every glance, every motion is mine. They do not yet know that what they face tonight is only the beginning of what I can do. More to come. I am the one telling you this. The alley smelled of wet asphalt and smoke. My boots slipped slightly on a patch of oil, and my heart didn't flinch. They closed in faster now, hands reaching, pushing, trying to prove control. I let them think I was cornered, trembling, a girl they could dominate. That mistake was theirs. Every step they took, I measured. Every motion, every twitch of a shoulder or hand, I cataloged. They thought they were hunting prey. They didn't know the prey could see every angle, read every pattern, anticipate every overcommitment. The first one lunged to grab my arm. I shifted, not with force but with timing. His momentum carried him forward. He stumbled into another. The sound of their bodies hitting concrete was like a drumbeat to the chaos. I am the one telling you this. They had trained to intimidate neighbors, not to fight someone who moved like they were inside their own tactical map. Every hand that reached for me became a tool I could redirect. Every punch thrown clumsily became a way to collapse their formation. They didn't know I had been trained to read people before they even knew themselves. I heard the leader bark orders, but his voice faltered. He was unprepared for hesitation from his own team, for panic hidden behind bravado. Their eyes flicked between each other and me, calculating. They were afraid, and they didn't even realize it yet. I used their fear. I let my hands brush theirs, not to strike, but to make them overextend, to fall into the mistakes they were making so predictably. I am the one telling you this. A single misstep in a system like theirs is enough to unravel months of control. I kept my breathing shallow, steady, a rhythm they couldn't match. One of them grabbed at my jacket. I twisted, let him pull, and his balance betrayed him. He fell into another man, knocking both down in a heap. I didn't strike hard. I didn't need to. Just a nudge at the right angle dismantled them faster than any punch could. They scrambled to regain position, to form a perimeter, to show strength. I watched, waiting for the moment they fully committed. That moment came when two men moved at the same time toward me, expecting me to panic. I didn't. I shifted again, using their combined momentum to push them into each other. The alley became a stage of bodies tangled with their own arrogance. The leader cursed, moving forward. He wanted to show dominance, to regain control. I let him step close, letting his overconfidence fill the space between us. His hands reached for a weapon, and I smiled inside. Timing, patience, anticipation. This is what I lived for. I am the one telling you this. They still didn't know what I was capable of. They didn't know who I really was. They thought this was a fight they could win. They were wrong. Every shove, every grab, every attempt to scare me only played into the control I had meticulously prepared. I grabbed a small piece of evidence from a fallen hand, a receipt smeared with grease. They had no idea I was collecting proof in the middle of combat, securing the ledger that would dismantle them. I pocketed it like it was a weapon because, in their world, knowledge is sharper than steel. They tried to regain posture, to regroup, but I saw cracks in their formation. The arrogance of trained intimidators collapses fast when confronted by someone who knows the angles of fear. I moved, nudged, redirected, not because I wanted violence, but because precision demanded it. They tried to retreat. The van at the street was ready, waiting to whisk them away, but I knew every step they took. Every glance they threw back at me. Fear multiplies when control slips. And I am the one telling you this. I watched their confidence crumble, like dry plaster under pressure. Their leader barked into a radio, tried to salvage authority, but hesitation was already contagious. One man faltered, another tripped over his own boots. A domino effect of panic spread through the group. They were untrained for this type of control, unprepared for someone who could manipulate space and momentum in real time. I let them realize it. Let the dread seep into their bones before I struck fully. I didn't rush. Every motion was deliberate. I wanted them to understand the mistake they had made in underestimating me. My first strike would not just break bodies, it would break their confidence, expose their errors, and signal the beginning of a reckoning. I am the one telling you this one careful step at a time. I ensured they knew the prey was not powerless. They were trapped by their own arrogance, not by my strength. Every failed grab, every stumble, every glance betrayed the truth I had been hiding. Bodies fell, scrambles halted, and the alley quieted for a heartbeat. I stood in the middle, boots wet, blood on the pavement, every sense alive. They looked at me differently now, not as a girl, not as a neighbor, but as someone they had already lost control over. I collected the small proofs from the ground, receipts, fingerprints, little traces that would unmask the network behind their intimidation. I am the one telling you this. I could have walked away, left them humiliated, but instead I let the ledger, the proof, and my position in this alley become weapons. The leader's face turned pale. He realized too late that they had underestimated me. That arrogance is heavier than any weapon when it is poorly timed. Panic spread faster than words. I stepped forward, slow, deliberate, and reminded them with a glance that tonight, they were not in charge. Every retreat, every falter, every frantic motion became evidence of their own failure. And yet, the alley was only the beginning. The ledger, the van, the witnesses, the notes they would all follow. More to come. I am the one telling you this, and the next part will show that control is never partial. It is total, and the HOA will learn that lesson soon. I am the one telling you this. And the alley stopped being just a place after that night. It became a ledger of mistakes, and the first page of how they would die by their own arrogance. My hands still smelled of oil and blood, but there was a different scent under it, the faint, metallic tang of purpose that comes when a plan starts to work. They drove off in a van that looked bland and official, and I watched the license plate until it blurred into the wet streetlights. Because a plate is a name when you know how to read it. I moved through the alley like someone walking through evidence, touching only what mattered and leaving the rest as theater for the investigators, who would come later. I am the one telling you this. I photographed faces. I photographed shoes. I photographed a coffee stain on a leader's sleeve that would later match a receipt in a folder. Every scrap I collected was not just proof. It was leverage. Leverage is a language you learn to speak when your job is to make the powerful answer. I called a contact on a burner and left a tangle of information in a voice I knew would be trusted. And I used words that would hook a reporter and a lawyer in the same sentence. They had assumed a quick scare would fix the problem. They had not calculated what happens when a scared neighbor decides to become a problem hunter instead of a victim. I am the one telling you this. I did not have a badge out in that alley, and I did not have to. What I had was better for that night: context, connections, and the ability to pull threads while the perpetrators still bled from their pride. I took the ledger receipt to a friend who used to read balance sheets for a living, and who now read them for truth. She told me what I already suspected. The coding was deliberate and the money lines were routed through shells designed to confuse auditors. We traced one transfer that night from a maintenance account to a mailbox company in another state, and that single vector made clear how far the protection spread and who it protected. I kept telling myself the thing I repeat when the work is cold: names are anchors, and paperwork is a skeleton that will not lie when flesh remembers. I am the one telling you this while men were panting in anger. I stitched a case in the margins of the alley with basic forensic patience and a memory trained to notice the wrong detail. The town looked sleepy from the outside, a tidy little set of lawns and polite smiles. But underneath the niceness, the system ran payments like a nervous system feeds a body. I had seen similar networks before, the kind that move quietly and then bloom like rot in municipal contracts. And I treated each clue like a splinter, small, painful, and able to start an infection if left. I set up meetings the next day under neutral pretenses, and I put people in rooms who would not have otherwise spoken to one another. Collecting witnesses is always a puzzle of courage and timing. I am the one telling you this. I arranged for a neighbor who feared reprisals to meet in a cafe with a local journalist and a retired accountant, and they spoke names into cups of coffee like confessions. The journalist took notes with a real hunger that made me trust their pen, and the accountant began to sketch lines through columns that revealed where money had been siphoned and why the HOA security had been paid in cash. Those names started small and then widened into a map: a cleaning company, a parking subcontractor, a property manager with a past that smelled like lawsuits. I moved slow and outward, never exposing more than necessary, always leaving breadcrumbs for people I trusted to follow when my own presence would be dangerous. I am the one telling you this. Caution is not cowardice when the goal is to break a system. It is arithmetic: how many moves until the opponent falls, who covers whose alibi, which man burns when questioned. The leader's phone pinged frequently that week, and one of the pings matched a transfer timestamp I had jotted down in the alley. That night, coincidence is rare when you trace money and blood together. I watched him from distance at community meetings, smiling and polite, and I mapped how his smile tightened when someone asked about budget overruns. Their hired guards roamed the complex in pairs, the same faces from the alley, carrying themselves like bullies with badges and a schedule. They assumed control through presence and planned violence through profit. I learned names, shifts, supply chains, and the times the vans left the compound to go pick up equipment and return with men who were not on any roster. I am the one telling you this. Knowledge is not just power in my line of work. It is safety for the people who will testify and for the ones who need protection from a system that prefers silence. I began putting pressure where pressure mattered: quiet calls, background questions, planted doubts in the minds of the men paying hush money, and a one-sentence email to the right contact in the county prosecutor's office that hinted at federal interest. That hint made local players twitch because federal interest is a magnifying glass you cannot shrug off with cash and a few favors. I watched the leader's posture change over 2 days into a man who slept with one eye open, and I counted the ways paranoia shows before guilt. I am the one telling you this. The first cracks in a corrupt net are never loud. They are whispers over dinner, awkwardness in the grocery line, a phone call that goes unanswered because someone is cleaning fingerprints. Then came a point where arrogance turned to panic and panic turned to betrayal. One of their own came to me with a face that had been chewed by fear and offered a name for a price smaller than his conscience. He gave me a drop location and a time, and I took it, knowing that a man who talks to save himself will also make mistakes that lead investigators to the head of the table. More to come. I am the one telling you this. And the next part is where the network feels the first true pressure from an organized line of questions, and where choices force men to reveal the depth of what they thought they had hid. I am the one telling you this. And the night the first man walked into my little trap, I felt the whole story pivot like a hinge that finally gives. He came to me in the back booth of a cafe the next morning, eyes too bright and hands too damp. And he smelled of alcohol and the cheap cologne men use to pretend they are cleaned of sin. He spoke fast, stumbling over names like he was trying to vomit out a ledger before it burned him. I listened, folded my hands, and let him spill the map: times, vans, locker numbers, a name for the accountant who forged the sheets. I am the one telling you this. When a man offers names to save his skin, he also hands you the way they try to hide. And half the battle is simply making someone comfortable enough to betray their own employer. He promised money, but I promised safety and a path that let him walk away with something like dignity. Men who deal in shame will cut a deal if you let them keep the smallest thing. That feels like it belongs to them. He gave me a drop location and a time and begged me not to let the leader know he had come to speak. Fear makes liars honest in ways anger never will. I took the information and set it like a bone in a trap. I told to quiet people, one who writes for a paper that hates corruption, and one who used to work cases, and I let them hold the edges of the story so I could see how the fabric tore. I am the one telling you this networks fall not because a single man is exposed, but because the people who feed the network turn on it when their own skin is threatened. That day, I watched a van unload crates into a storage locker with a number that matched what the man had given me. The driver waved at a security guard who nodded, the kind of nod that says, "We all know our part." I took a picture of the license plate. I marked the time. And I sat back and watched the logistics of guilt move like pieces on a board. The man who had come to me later texted that fear had a shadow on his life. Now he was shaking. And his message read like a confession with fingerprints, naming names I had only suspected. I am the one telling you this. Once the first man smelled survival, others started considering the arithmetic of staying silent versus staying free. And arithmetic is a language corruption sometimes forgets to speak. A week later, a small raid happened in a storage facility to counties over not my raid, not yet, but a raid that pushed one of their supply lines into panic and forced their inside man to ask for a bigger bargain than he had planned. I had to move carefully, then too much exposure would spook witnesses. Too little would let them destroy evidence. And in the middle of that knife edge, you learn to breathe slow and think in stages. I arranged for a witness protection briefing, not formal, but a set of instructions whispered into ears that still smelled of alley smoke. And I made sure the people who would testify understood that the ledger mattered more than revenge. I am the one telling you this. The goal then was not theatrics, but to create a chain of testimony anchored in things, license plates, timestamps, receipts, and the kinds of petty human mistakes men make when they think they are invisible. We used the press like a slow wave, seeding small facts that would not be enough alone, but together would make a case that could not be ignored without exposing the people who refused to look. The leader, who had been a smiling face in community meetings, began to look smaller in public, and his smiles acquired a stiffness as if someone had surgically removed the easy lines from his face. I watched him at a fundraiser where he tried to be warm. He kept glancing at his phone, like someone waiting for a verdict, and the people around him started shifting in subtle ways, choosing sides without saying the words aloud. I am the one telling you this. Exposure is not always loud. Often it is a series of small, corrosive truths that leave the guilty looking like they have aged minutes in front of you. Then came the betrayal that mattered. One of their own approached me through a lawyer, nervous and pale, offering a hard drive and a testimony if I guaranteed immunity that I could not give, but could protect until lawyers did their work. I had to weigh that offer like an executioner weighing mercy. A hard drive full of transfers could topple the whole front, but a man who flips can also flip back when pressure mounts. And I needed witnesses who would stand. I am the one telling you this. I told him to give me everything he had, and to be ready to speak to someone real, someone with subpoena power, because half measures only make monsters angrier and smarter. He brought the drive at night and slid it into my bag like a wounded animal leaving itself in hands that might help. And when I opened it later, the files were a map of payment nodes and shell companies whose owners wore polite suits. I copied, I verified, I wrote down metadata until my hand cramped. Because evidence is arithmetic and the numbers do not lie when men try to make lies look like books. I am the one telling you this. The ledger was worse than we thought. Deeper pockets, older practices, and a list of names that included people who thought they were untouchable because their money reached places other people feared to walk. As we prepared to present the findings, one of our key witnesses vanished for a day and then showed up bruised, saying he had been warned by someone who called himself a friend. The warning was a blunt thing and it smelled of threats. That moment told me something vital. They were not afraid of exposure. They were terrified of witnesses who refused to be quiet, and terror leads to reckless moves. I am the one telling you this. Their next step, predictable in a way that made it dangerous, was to silence the threads we had started pulling. And silence for them had a price tag they were willing to pay. We tightened security around the witnesses and moved meetings to neutral places. But men with money and contempt are inventive. And a subtle fracture in our circle appeared when one of the quieter neighbors suddenly stopped answering calls. I went to see her and found a window left open and a coffee cup gone cold. She had left a note that read, "I cannot be part of this." Fear eats people in ways that make them leave pieces of themselves behind. I am the one telling you this. Every retreat from fear is a small wound in the collection of truth. But it also sharpens the resolve of those who remain, and we banked on that stubborn, ugly courage. Then, the night before we were to hand a package to a federal contact, someone set fire to a storage locker containing records that belonged to a small group of whistleblowers. The smoke tasted like escalation. That arson was a message and a misfire. Evidence was lost, but witnesses saw who was there. And sometimes in chaos, people remember faces they would prefer to forget. I am the one telling you this. The net was tightening, and the people inside it began to make mistakes driven by panic. And those mistakes would become the threads that pulled the whole garment apart. More to come. I am the one telling you this, and the next part will show how pressure fractures alliances, how one desperate choice forces a cascade, and how the world learns the true cost when a protector chooses to stay and fight. I am the one telling you this. And when they burned the locker, it changed the pace from slow corrosion to urgent survival. We tightened safe houses, moved witnesses at odd hours, and put signals in places only those who needed to know could read. They struck stupid, and stupidity leaves fingerprints. Their arson cost them evidence, but bought us fear in broad daylight. A man who had been steady cracked under pressure and confessed a meeting that was supposed to be private. His voice trembled when he said the words, and that tremble gave us a time and a place. I watched the leader from across a streetlight at a charity event and saw how he guarded his phone. Like a relic, that was the face of a man who knew the roof was caving in. I am the one telling you this. The deeper you pull at corruption, the more it pushes back with everything it has. They hired muscle from outside the neighborhood. Men whose hands smelled of grease and whose eyes were empty of community ties. Those men were better trained than local bullies. They moved like professionals, which told me the operation was bigger than I had first thought. We anticipated a hit, but anticipation is not prevention unless you move first. And moving first meant drawing them into a place where their brutality would be visible. I arranged for a stage delivery of bait and watched the vans that answered roll in like vultures to a fresh carcass. One of our witnesses, a man who had promised loyalty out of fear, called in sick. And I knew then betrayal was not only external, it lives inside pockets of the frightened. I am the one telling you this. When people fear for their lives, alliances shift like wind-blown papers, and you must be ready for any gust. The night of the bait, the muscle arrived early and impatient, and their impatience cost them structure. They fanned out like men who wanted blood before confirmation. We had cameras in place, quiet observers, people who would step in if things went wrong. And I had my own small team watching from the dark. A scuffle began that should have been quick and dirty, but it turned into a bloodletting the muscle had not expected. Because we did not fight like neighbors, we fought like we had rehearsed consequences. I disarmed a man who moved too fast. Another reached for a blade and found his fingers locked in a wrist that did not belong to a scared girl. They misread my body and paid for it. They thought my size meant innocence. Instead, they found the precision of training. I am the one telling you this. The first man who fell to the pavement screamed promises he could not keep, and the van doors slammed as others tried to retreat. We took a hard drive in that fight, the kind of device that kept records of transfers and a list of names, proof you can show in court, not just whisper in back alleys. That possession changed everything. A hard drive is literal weight. and it made the risk they would take to get it back enormous. They escalated. Calls were made into the night with voices that used positions and money as shields. Someone mentioned cleanup, and I heard an edge that made my skin crawl. I called a federal contact and left a message that was calm but clear enough to rouse attention. The word federal moved pieces in ways local whispers never could. I am the one telling you this. Invoking a larger hand is a political thing, and politics raises the stakes beyond local thugs and into people who do not like scrutiny. Shortly after the call, a car followed me home to men in a roomy sedan who thought they could scare me with presents. They learned that night that presence is nothing against preparation. I led them into a crowd and let their confidence evaporate under the pressure of witnesses. A judge took notice of the pattern when the journalist ran pieces, and the accountant handed over ledgers to a federal investigator. People with power began to tighten their own lips. They retaliated by spreading rumors about me, claims of vigilante justice. Lies meant to muddy the narrative because when guilt cannot be excused by law, it tries to muddy the court of public opinion. I am the one telling you this. Mud is tempting for them because it stains without proof. But mud also dries and flakes off under scrutiny. Our legal contact moved quietly and with force, securing warrants based on the drive and our witnesses. The first subpoenas came like a winter that could not be turned back. Their network splintered in small ways. Men changed shifts, vans rerouted. Names were removed from lists in panic, but splintering also exposes edges you can use. We prepared for the raids. We braced for retaliation. We protected people who could not protect themselves, and we readied the proof that would not be easy to deny. More to come. I am the one telling you this, and the next part will show a courtroom of its own kind: power, fear, and the dangerous moment when people with everything to lose decide to play dirty. I am the one telling you this. And the day of confrontation came like thunder after months of waiting. The HOA leaders thought they could intimidate, hide, and manipulate, but they had underestimated the weight of preparation and the consequences of arrogance. I arrived at the meeting place early, boots silent on wet concrete, senses stretched to every movement, every shadow, every whisper. They looked up when I entered, eyes wide, realizing that I was calm, steady, and unafraid, of presence that radiated control. I am the one telling you this. Fear is contagious, and I wanted them to feel it in their bones before any words were exchanged. Their muscles shifted nervously, checking guns and wallets, unsure if I was ordinary or something else entirely. I smiled lightly, letting a pause stretch. Silence is louder than shouting when tension hangs thick. I had the hard drive, the receipts, the witnesses, and the proof. They had only assumptions and bravado. They stepped closer, trying to dominate space, but each movement they made was anticipated. Every angle observed, every step a calculation against their own hubris. I am the one telling you this. Arrogance is a weapon they wielded poorly, and tonight it would pierce them instead. I laid out the facts slowly, deliberately, letting them hear names, dates, transactions, and transfers that traced back to their hands. A bead of sweat rolled down the leader's temple. He realized the network he trusted had already started to crumble. One by one, they tried excuses, denials, and threats. But words cannot undo evidence and cannot unsee witnesses ready to testify. I reminded them who I am in subtle ways, letting posture, movement, and precision convey that I am not just a neighbor. They are in the wrong story now. I am the one telling you this. Control is not a bluff. It is a series of small, inevitable consequences. The muscle tried to make a move, but I intercepted, disarming a hand with exactness and making it clear that every attempt to regain dominance would fail. Their panic escalated, voices shaking, eyes darting to exits that were already accounted for, to windows they could not escape through. I let them squirm under the weight of anticipation before revealing the final proof, the ledger, cross-referenced and backed by witnesses who could step forward any moment. I am the one telling you this. Watching a man who believed himself untouchable collapse in slow realization is something few people get to see. They realize then that intimidation only works when the other side fears impotence. They faced competence, patience, and proof, all combined into someone they assumed was powerless. The leader tried to salvage authority, but the cracks in his confidence were too deep, and each lie he told only confirmed his guilt. I walked closer, letting my presence alone enforce order, no shout. No threat, just calm inevitability. I am the one telling you this. Sometimes the strongest weapon is patience, and the heaviest hand is silent observation. The van outside their supposed exit had been photographed, tracked, and noted, so even retreat would not save them from scrutiny. Witnesses had been moved, the journalist briefed, and federal eyes alerted. The network could not hide behind fear any longer. I watched the subtle betrayals begin, small signals, secret phone calls, glances that spoke louder than threats. Their own men questioned choices, their loyalty cracking under the weight of evidence. Because fear multiplies in corners they thought were safe. I am the one telling you this even now, months later. I can see the exact moment arrogance collided with reality. The meeting ended with no dramatic shots fired, no screams, but with something far heavier, the realization that the game had changed and they had lost. I walked out into the street, letting the desk swallow me, knowing that the ledger, the witnesses, and the evidence were now chained but would not break. More to come. I am the one telling you this, and the final part will show the aftermath, the closure, and the revelation that no one expected. The street was silent, too silent. The air tasted like metal and ash. My boots echoed. Not one sound answered. I breathed, slow, measured. I felt the ledger in my bag, heavy, full of secrets. Every name, every number, a weight in my hand. I looked at the van, empty, tires cold. The streetlights flickered. Shadows danced where no one should be. I reflected. All the months, the traps, the betrayals, the careful patience, all of it had led here. And yet, the world felt off. I am the one telling you this. I remembered fear. Not mine, theirs. How easily it spreads. How quickly arrogance shatters. The city slept. Or pretended to. I wondered how many people I had saved without them knowing. How many I had endangered without choice. I touched the pocket where the drive rested. Proof. Power. Evidence. Yet the weight in my chest was heavier than all of it. I paused. The wind shifted. A distant scream. Or a memory. Hard to tell. The night had teeth. I thought of them. The leaders, the muscle, the ones who betrayed, the ones who hid. All of them moving like pieces I had already counted. I am the one telling you this. I questioned myself. Was control ever mine? Or just an illusion I traded for fear and silence? I heard a click behind me. Not the usual. Not a door. Something else. Something alive. Something aware. I turned. Nothing. Just the shadows. Or so I thought. I stepped forward. My breath loud. My pulse loud. I felt eyes. Too many eyes. Watching. Calculating. I tried to call it rational. Tried to name it. But the rational had left months ago. I raised my hand. To do what? To defend. To signal. Nothing seemed right. I am the one telling you this. I realized then. The ledger, the witnesses, the plans. It had never mattered. A movement. Quick. Impossible to see. A sound. Sharp. Final. I fell. The street swallowed me. Cold asphalt. Blood. Silence. I am the one telling you this. And then, nothing. The last thought, control is an illusion. Always was. More to come. Or maybe nothing.